Welcome to the 10-minute wrap-up of Chapter 25, basically a history of life on Earth. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this particular chapter, but we will talk a little bit about the conditions on the early Earth. We'll talk about what a fossil record is. We'll start with the origin of single-celled organisms. We'll talk about mass extinctions, which is one of the most critical things. We'll talk about adaptive radiation, which is due to the mass extinctions, and a little bit of gene expression and macroevolution. And so, again, we all know about this thing called continental divide. If we look at the continents, we can kind of see where they match up and kind of things like that. We also do know that roughly about 65 million years ago, at the end of the dinosaur era, that an extraterrestrial object struck the Earth and gave massive devastation there. If we were to take a look at the history of the Earth, all 4.6 billion years in 1 hour, we can see that, again, after the Earth forms, life occurred relatively soon afterwards, right? Roughly about 9 minutes and 18 seconds. We tend to see algae cells first. We tend to see bacterial cells. This lasted for a very, very, very long time. The cells with the first nucleus, again, occur over here at roughly about 8 o'clock. And so while life evolved relatively early on Earth, it was relatively simple for a very, very long time. Once this first eukaryotic organism evolved, then we started to see multicellular organisms. Once we saw the multicellular organisms, again, we saw relatively quickly more complex organisms occur. But again, these complex organisms are occurring roughly from 11 till 12 o'clock. And so a lot of the life on Earth was really not much more than bacteria for a very, very long time. How did this first simple life evolve? Basically, we had to have abiotic synthesis of small organic molecules. And again, this has been shown to take place. Those organic monomers had to come together and form what we call polymers. We then had to produce what are called protocells, these kind of first beginning cells. And then we see the origin of self-replicating molecules. Again, this could take place because in this early Earth, things were relatively stable for a long, long time. There weren't things really changing things up. There weren't living things there to kind of eat things and take things apart and kind of stuff like that. So again, the adaptations, life competing to get life to occur in that time didn't have to compete with life that was already here. What are some of the early lives that we see? Again, stromatolites, which are evidence of early prokaryotes, occur roughly about 3.5 billion years ago. We see these rock-like structures where basically we have bacteria and sediment. We see things like that a lot. We see stromatolites a lot today in Shark Bay in Australia, and where we have these mats of algae that will cause the things to come out. And again, we tend to see rocks like this occur and rocks like this occur where we have chert and iron and chert and iron, and basically these organisms were kind of interesting because they were big polluters. They produced oxygen, okay? And so in the production of photosynthesis, they split water and produced oxygen, and that oxygen started to accumulate roughly about 2.7 billion years ago, and it killed a lot of the different species that were there. That's probably one of our first big major die-offs. And we'll talk about the 5 major die-offs and possibly the 6 major die-off that we have now. And so, again, when we go back and we look at the geological record, and here's just a line that we see, is that we first see bacteria, we see relatively simple organisms, and again, there's a lot of time going on here. And then once life evolves, and gets to a certain point, we tend to see lots and lots of diversity occurring. And so, again, if we look at the fossil record, again, we see more and more complex organisms. I like this because, again, 230 million years ago, life was not much more complex than this. Again, 150 million years ago, we're starting to see plants. 65 million years ago, we're seeing these beautiful, large things that we call dinosaurs. And so, again, I don't necessarily want you to know the exact dates on this, because we don't know the exact dates, but I want you to know the relative order in which such things occur. How do we know some of this stuff? Again, we can use radiometric dating. This is carbon-14 dating, which can only, again, thousands of years that we're looking at. We're not looking at the millions of years that we have here. But basically, a radioisotope, once it's produced, will actually decay into the non-radioactive daughter isotopes, and we can look at those numbers over time to get an idea of how old something is. Again, what I would like you to do, these are the key events in Earth's history that I would like you to know. Again, when did the prokaryotes come about? The Earth is roughly about 4 billion years old. Roughly soon after that 4 billion years, we see the first prokaryotic organisms, whether it's archaebacteria or eubacteria or whatever the history of those things are. We then see the production of an atmospheric oxygen. And we'll go over this in the next class, but this allowed life to be a lot more efficient in the production of energy. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, this oxygen was really toxic to the organisms that were there and killed a lot of things. Again, at roughly about 2 billion years ago, we start to see the single-celled eukaryotes. At roughly about 1.5 billion years ago, we start to see the multicellular eukaryotes. And roughly at about 0.75 to 1 billion years ago, we see animals and land plants, things going on. And then, again, things get really complex from there. And again, relatively recently, 200,000 years ago, we see us human beings come into play. Again, early animals, what do we know what some of these look like? It's hard to say because they really didn't leave a lot of fossils. Again, if we look really hard, we can see things like this, which look like the animal embryos that we can see in relatively early stage. Are they real? Are they not real? I don't know. Basically, we had this thing that we call the Cambrian explosion. That again, before the Cambrian, we really didn't see much evidence of life. Maybe you saw holes and burrows and kind of things like that. But anywhere between 700 million to 1 billion years ago. So we can't say billions and billions of years when we say life. Life is really not that old. Again, this Cambrian explosion, we see most of the different types of animals, from sponges to jellyfish to sea stars to chordates to brachiopods, annelids, mollusks, arthropods. All these are there roughly at that time. So relatively quickly, they occurred. Again, where do the mammals come from? The mammals come from basically the reptiles, the dinosaurs. We are kind of a little bit of the leftover of the dinosaurs. We're not as close as other ones, but we have these other organisms. Actually, I shouldn't say the dinosaurs. We come from something that's very similar. And again, how do we do this? We kind of look at things on the jawbone. There's a number of people look at it, and we look at things like our DNA. To go really back quickly, about 500 million years ago, we see plants, animals, and fungi colonize the land. Basically, we all came out together and we all colonized it together. We couldn't really each individually do it on our own because the animals couldn't come out here because, again, if there was no plants, there was no food. If the plants are out here by themselves, there's nothing really to kind of recycle the materials back. So we had to come out together. Again, in macroevolution, we're looking at these major changes that cause major groups of organisms. And again, what we really have to say is where this come about is basically by extinction. And so what we see is we see lots and lots, we see the development of lots of different type groups of organisms. And then what happens is those organisms crash. And so what happens is when you don't have organisms occupying a niche, then we have this adaptive radiation that will come out. And again, if we look at these, we see the big five extinctions occurring. The last really big extinction that we looked at was the Cretaceous-Tertiary extinction, the KT boundary, which is basically a meteor came and hit the Earth and basically caused all kinds of troubles. Another problem that we have is our mass extinctions tend to occur when the water temperature goes up a little bit higher. And we're tending to see that right now. The things that mankind are doing are causing the water temperature to go up. But, again, it's a relative thing. We would not be here if those mass extinctions wouldn't occur. Again, we would still be bacteria growing in the seas, and there would be nothing on land if that first aquatic organisms didn't produce oxygen that caused a major extinction. And so what we're tending to see is that, again, if we look at this idea of that the number of predators kind of remain constant, the genera of predators, the number of different types of predators remain constant, we get more predators. And so what happens is as we see a die out, we're starting to see these predators come back, and those predators kind of hatch up what these different niches are. Again, it doesn't mean overall there's more predators. It means there's different types of predators. We see more and more. And again, this adaptive radiation of mammals, again, mammals, we are around about the same time as the dinosaurs, but there wasn't very many of us because we were competing with the dinosaurs for space. Once the dinosaurs were out of the picture, then that gave us eutherians the chance to radiate out and become a host of many different species. Again, where does this adaptive radiation occur? We tend to see as, the big die-offs, when it leaves things out, that would leave things available for us. But again, things like the Hawaiian Islands, when a new island appears, organisms can go onto that island, and we can see different forms of that organism successfully take on those areas. Again, what biological processes contribute to this? Again, relatively small changes in development can affect big changes. And so what we're looking at here is, again, differences between chimpanzees and human skulls. Again, as infants, they look a little bit bigger, but what's happening in the human skull is that we maintain some infantile exhibits. Again, here the oxytole is an aquatic salamander that maintains some developmental. Again, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but we have these things that are called homeobox or Hox genes, which again give us different structures that we can look at. And that's it.